Let's face it, I'm not your friendly revolutionary from next door. I don't like revolutions because, let's face it, I'm too old for that and too unsporty too, I guess. It was different in my youth, of course. Oh, a revolution. What a funny idea. Sitting in the mountains, freezing and eating rats while being hunted down by a trained organized army. On the second thought, it doesn't sound as nice. However, I think and I feel that societies have to evolve and that revolutions, well, just trash anything and lead to more or less the same system afterwards. But being a history crack, I really have to say they make sense from time to time. And it's not about change, it's never about change. But people tend to value stuff that they paid for. And if you pay for it in blood, well, it was even more. You see, after the Second World War, the right to vote for your president was used by almost 100% of Austrian citizens. And in 2010, it was down at half of that. You see, systems get old. And you tend to take the stuff that is already there and was there when your parents were there as granted, as something that is part of nature. But the things that suck, these things become more and more obvious from year to year. And people want change. And they want easy change. They want just these things that suck gone. But they don't take in consideration that if you start a revolution, you could lose the things you take for granted. You see, the problem is that every solution comes with some additional problems attached. And then, of course, to have a revolution, you need one thing, hunger. Hunger is important because revolutions don't happen when people are well fed. Ask the Romans, bread and games, that did work very well for a long time. But since food has something to do with nature, and nature tends to be a bitch every now and then, hunger may become a problem, and it may become a problem sooner than you think. And if people are hungry, well, revolutionary ideas become really sexy, and if you have nothing to lose, but all to gain, real revolutions form. And I'm not talking about these Antifa kind of revolutions, I mean real revolutions. And as much as I think of them as quite dangerous for your and my health, and as much as I don't personally want to issue or want to witness one of it from all too near distance, well, they reset this feeling of, okay, that's normal, that's not part of the nature, this is not normal, and I could lose something, and I did gain something, but I paid for that. This feeling of that some of the stuff we have is not normal. This feeling is forged in revolutions. It looks like revolutions are a necessary evil. And governments don't like them because, well, being an official in the government in a revolution is something that is even more unhealthy, as, let's say, smoking in a gas station while covered in dynamite, jungling live grenades. So governments have this tendency to prevent revolutions. The Holy Alliance from 1815 by Prussia, Austria and Russia was not as much an alliance against other empires. It was mostly a guarantee. If you have a revolution against the crown, we come over and help. If we have trouble, you do the same for us. If we're talking about counter-revolution, that's the high-end version of that. And what was suppressed there? Oh, a quite new idea to this time, a very revolutionary and very left idea that was. It was called nationalism. The idea was that French speakers should have their own nation where they can speak French, and the German speakers have their own nation speaking German, and the Russians have their own nation speaking Russian, and have their own rules, their own cultures, and so forth and so forth. And this was kind of a horror scenario for the multicultural elites and entities like Austria and of course the monarchy. Because you see, in reality, different cultures, well, they don't like it if they are ruled by someone who is not even part of them. If you haven't read the history book to the very end, spoiler alert, this idea was successful, this idea won the race. And it did not lead to everlasting peace, quite the opposite in fact, but hey, that's the problem with all these lefty revolutionary ideas, they never work as well in reality as on paper. So we had then borders, and borders were quite cool for the time because, you know, you where are you? You did absolutely know what kind of law was relevant right now. In the older times, you always had to check which king is in charge, because some other king conquered the land you're in or bought the land you're in, and you had to know who is in charge because his law was the law. Borders make this relatively easy. National borders make this even more easy. And if your government makes things like enslaving you, you have to do something in a national state, because going away might perhaps be an option, but it involves time, effort, and the goodwill of the other side, which makes migration pretty tough sometimes. So you have to deal with whatever crazy despot came in charge in your country. And perhaps by your own vote, support, or whatever, you had to deal with them. And you had to take care that to make a reform. And if they don't want to reform, you have to do a revolution. But if you remove the borders, your leader can now say, yeah, if you like it here, go somewhere else. Revolutions won't happen. Because going away is always the easy way out. If there would be a free nation somewhere left on Earth, I guess I would be on my way. But since every place in the moment on this very planet is in the moment as fucked as Central Europe, or even worse, I'm now in one of these places that everybody else comes to. And can I blame them? I guess not. But you see, the problem is not solved if you move unhappy people that would have revolted to another place where they are even more not really happy. You see, most of especially Muslim migrants hate it here. They hate us, they hate our culture, they hate our food, they hate the weather, the climate, and they hate everything else. They know that, we know that, we talk about that, everybody knows how it is. But then they say, well, it's still better living here in this stupid shithole full of infidels than living with violence. And again, I kind of understand that. You see, globalism is the idea to have no borders on Earth. And it's now propagated by the left under the trade name No Nations, No Borders, which is misleading because most of these guys, they want a state. Because they want such things as welfare and so on. And if you have one Earth, no borders, well, you have one state, one. That has something to do with mathematics, and I know it's hard to get over that if you're a lefty, but it has to do with mathematics, believe me, it's one. One government, perhaps one leader. One, not none. If you have none, we are in the realm of the anarcho-capitalists. And perhaps you want that, but then you're not a lefty, technically. However, normally that's not what the left wants. They want one nation. And one nation is something that looks incredibly sexy to the elite that owns already more or less all the stuff on the planet. Inclusive us, of course. It's the elite that loves this idea. Well, because they benefit a lot of that. But let's say they succeed and they have no borders on Earth, one nation. How do you organize a world-spanning revolution against them if this government starts to be corrupt? And I guess it starts very soon to be very, very, very corrupt. And what do you do when they start to build concentration camps and these things? What do you do then? How do you organize a world-spanning revolution? I tell you, you can't. That's impossible. Globalization is in essence the Holy Alliance all over again. It's one part of the moment of the methods to implement stuff that would never ever worked in functioning nations. Because if in nations people become so poor that they are essentially slaves of their elite, they start to revolt. And since other nations normally have to deal with their own problems, these nations will change. You see, our nations are already way too big. The people of a certain region can't apply pressure on the governments if the governments are hundreds of kilometers away. And you are, at least on paper, free to move somewhere else, somewhere where it is different. This is where secession came into place, because those parts of the land have a tendency to say, okay, we can't influence you, so why are you our leaders? We do now our own thing, we are independent, bye bye. And governments will never allow that, they can never allow that. The result is then normally a lot of propaganda, pressure to the locals who are in power there to suppress these movements, or then civil war that leads to nothing like in the American Civil War, or to the Balkanization on, let's say, the Balkan, for instance. People say it's bad what happened on the Balkan, and they are right with that. But now, since it's ordered and there is in fact a place for the more Western-oriented Slavs, the more Russian-oriented Slavs, the Muslim Slavs, and so on, it's peacefuler over there. Peacefuler than, let's say, under the rule of the Austrians 100 years ago that didn't give a crap about cultural differences, or the Yugoslavian rule that didn't care about this much either. They were stronger as a whole, of course, they were the power of the Balkan, and when I talk with friends from this region, this is something what they miss. There comes the nostalgia to say, we were the mightiest there, now the others are more mighty than we, and this sucks. But in the end, they agree that living side by side is better than being non-stop in struggle about what culture should be dominant, what kind of letters should they use, and if they love or hate the West or Russia or both not. The Balkanization of the world would be bloody and messy and terrible, but I think it would give us the opportunity to live, or to all of us to live as we want. I think this will be the fate of America 2 years after the dollar is not the reserve currency anymore. Because those parts of this country that actually produce something, produce values, will not be willing and perhaps not even able to drag those with them who don't do anything. For us in Europe, it's easier. We have quite an idea about where the borders should be. We would just reinstall them, which is relatively easy done. We might not even have to kill our elite, which I would be perfectly fine with that, since I'm not a particular fan of killing people in the end of the day. And the Europe elite was always able to adapt, so I think they would behave and they would adapt. But if the globalists would be successful, well then it's game over for some centuries, because fighting a supernation with nobody to aid you, that controls virtually anything, would be a dictatorship, would be corrupt, would be inefficient, and would be doomed to die under its own weight, but drag anything with it on the way down. Perhaps it can exist 100 years, it surely never will reach 1,000 years, and afterwards nations, the idea that we live side by side as different cultures, might reappear. Whatever they do, it will reappear. Humans will always find reasons to be different from each other, and strict borders, it's really, they produce clearness and sureness and peace in the end of the day. Let's accept that. Let's accept that we are different. Let us live side by side, following our own silly rules, and accept that others follow other silly rules. We don't have to become one. We have to learn to respect that being different is something that works, and we have to learn that respect of differences include a border of some kind, and as smaller places, as easier and as unbloodier governments could be changed, adapted, repaired, or even resetted. And governments have to be the tool to work for the people on this very spot and do what they need. Even a reset is something that could be done without one drop of blood spilled. What a horror version for the rich and mighty.